walk into a grocery store today, or honestly, even a gas station, and you are going to see it. It is everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
It's in jars, it's in sprays, people are putting it in their coffee, slathering it on their skin, maybe even frying their morning eggs in it. We are talking, of course, about coconut oil.
The ubiquitous coconut. It really has taken over the world.
It has had quite the PR turnaround, hasn't it? I remember so distinctly, maybe 20 years ago, this was the absolute villain.
The movie theater popcorn fat.
Yes, the stuff that was going to clog every artery in your body. And then, I mean, practically overnight, the narrative just flipped. Now it's the superfood that burns belly fat, cures brain fog, all of it.
It is a fascinating case study in, marketing versus metabolism. And honestly, it is one of the areas where the confusion is arguably the most dangerous.
How so?
Because you have one camp screaming that it is a miracle brain fuel, and you have the American Heart Association basically saying it is edible heart disease.
Right. And our mission today is to figure out, who's right. But looking at the research you've pulled, and we have a huge stack of systematic reviews and human trials here, it seems like the answer hinges on a massive case of mistaken identity.
It really does. That is the core of the issue.
Because the data draws a very hard line between coconut oil and this other thing called MCT oil. And I have to be honest, before reading these notes, I use those terms interchangeably.
Everyone does.
I thought MCT oil was just a liquid coconut oil.
And that is exactly what the supplement industry wants you to think. But while they come from the same source, chemically and metabolically, they are completely different animals.
Okay.
And if you treat them as the same thing, you aren't just wasting money, you might be getting the opposite biological effect of what you are hoping for.
Okay, that is a big claim. So let's get into the weeds.
Yeah.
We are sticking strictly to human data today, right?
Strict human trials. No mice. We need to know what happens in your body, not a rodent's body. We were looking at rigorous reviews, including data from the American Heart Association and major meta-analyses.
Perfect. Let's start with the chemistry, but keep it accessible. The acronym is MCT, medium-chain triglycerides. What does that actually mean?
So fat isn't just fat. Fats are these chains of carbon atoms. And the fats you get in a steak, olive oil, or an avocado have these long tails, usually 14 carbons or more. We call those long-chain triglycerides.
Okay, long chains, heavy, complex molecules.
Exactly. And medium, as you'd guess, just means shorter tails.
Right.
Medium-chain fats have tails between 6 and 12 carbons. The magic numbers we care about for this deep dive are C8, which is caprylic acid, C10, citric acid, and C12, lauric acid.
C8, C10, C12.
Got it. Well, here's the deception. If you look at a jar of organic virgin coconut oil, it is roughly 50% lauric acid, which is C12.
Which, by the definition you just gave, is a medium chain. It has 12 carbons, so that's an MCT.
Chemically, yes, it fits the definition on paper. But biologically, it's an imposter.
An imposter? How?
This is the most critical part of the whole mechanism. So when you eat a long-chain fat, like a piece of steak or even healthy olive oil, it has to take the scenic route through your body.
The scenic route.
It requires bile to break it down. It has to be packaged into these little carriers called chylomicrons. It goes into your lymphatic system, and eventually it makes its way to the blood. It's a slow, laborious process.
Okay, so that is the standard digestion track for most fats.
Right. Now, C12, that lauric acid, the main component of coconut oil, it mostly takes that same scenic route. It acts like a long-chain fat.
Okay.
But the smaller MCTs, the C8 and C10, they get the VIP treatment.
They skip the line.
Completely. They don't need bile. They bypass the lymphatic system entirely. They go straight from your gut through what's called the portal vein directly to the liver.
Whoa, wait, the portal vein? Why does it matter if the fat hits the liver that fast?
Because when those fats hit the liver that quickly, the liver basically has no choice but to oxidize them immediately. It turns them into ketones instantly. And ketones are high-octane energy. That is the brain fuel buzz everyone talks about.
So if I eat a spoonful of coconut oil, which is mostly C12...
You're taking the scenic route, you get very few ketones. In fact, research shows that to get the same therapeutic dose of ketones you'd get from just 1 tablespoon of purified C8 MCT oil, you'd have to eat a massive amount of coconut oil.
How much is massive?
We are talking 60 to 100 milliliters.
That is almost half a cup of oil.
Yes. Which is nearly 900 calories. So if you're eating coconut oil thinking you're getting this metabolic shortcut or a ketone spike, you generally aren't. You're just eating a lot of slow-burning fat.
That completely changes the value proposition. So when we see headlines about MCTs boosting metabolism or fueling the brain, they are referencing the effects of C8 and C10.
Precisely.
But the coconut oil on the shelf is selling us C12.
It is a bait and switch. And that distinction, that right there, explains almost all the conflicting headlines we see.
Well, let's tackle those headlines. Let's start with the brain. I feel like I see this everywhere. Coconut oil prevents Alzheimer's, or MCTs cure brain fog. What is the actual mechanism here? Why would oil help your brain?
It goes back to that express lane we just talked about.
Yeah.
In conditions like Alzheimer's, or even what's called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, the brain develops a very specific problem. It becomes insulin resistant.
Like type 2 diabetes, but for the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some researchers even call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. Essentially, the brain cells are starving because they can't process glucose sugar effectively anymore. We call this the brain energy gap.
So the brain is hungry, the food is there, but it literally cannot eat it.
Correct. But the brain has a sort of hybrid engine. It can run on glucose or it can run on ketones. So the theory is, if we can flood the system with ketones, we can bypass that broken glucose pathway and fuel the brain directly.
It's like kicking on a backup generator when the main power grid goes down.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the evidence supports this, but, and this is a huge but, it depends entirely on which oil you use and who you are genetically.
Okay, let's break that down. Which oil works?
The purified MCT oil, specifically C8, works best because it creates the highest spike in ketones. Systematic reviews, like one by Abgerinos and colleagues, found that MCT supplementation did lead to modest improvements in cognition and verbal memory in people with mild cognitive impairment.
Define modest. Are we talking remembering your childhood phone number or just remembering where you put your keys?
More the latter. It is a measurable functional improvement, but it is not a cure.
Okay.
But when they test regular coconut oil for this, the results are usually pretty disappointing because, again, it doesn't raise the ketone levels high enough. You need to get above about 0.5 millimole to fill that energy gap.
So for the brain boost, you need the high-octane stuff. You need the purified C8. But you mentioned genetics. This wasn't something I expected to see in an oil study.
This is a crucial detail that gets left out of the pop science articles all the time. There is a gene called APOE4.
I've heard of this. That's the major risk factor gene for Alzheimer's, right?
That's the one. And about 30 to 40% of the population carries at least one copy. In these clinical trials, they found something fascinating. The cognitive benefits of MCT oil were almost exclusively seen in people who are APOE4 negative.
Wait, so the people who are at the highest genetic risk, the APOE4 carriers, did not get the benefit?
In many studies, yes, they were non-responders. We think it is because the APOE4 gene affects how lipids and ketones are transported into the brain. So if you have that gene, your brain might struggle to actually use the ketones, even if they are circulating in your blood.
That is huge. Because if I go buy a bottle of expensive MCT oil for an aging parent, hoping it helps their memory, it might do absolutely nothing, depending on their DNA.
Exactly. And this explains why the science looks so conflicted. If a trial happens to have a lot of APOE4 carriers, it looks like the oil fails. If it has mostly non-carriers, it looks like a miracle.
So for the listener, the takeaway is, if you're dealing with mild cognitive decline, pure C8C10 MCT oil might be worth a try, but it is not a guaranteed fix. And coconut oil is likely useless for this specific purpose.
That's the harsh reality of the data.
Fascinating. Okay, let's pivot to the other big organ we worry about, the heart. This is where the American Heart Association comes in with, the red warning flags. They really hate coconut oil.
They advise strongly against it. And the data supports their concern, particularly regarding LDL cholesterol.
The so-called bad cholesterol.
Right. We have rigorous meta-analyses, like one from Yulikantan in 2020 that looked at 16 different clinical trials. And they compared coconut oil to non-tropical vegetable oils like olive oil or canola oil. The result was crystal clear.
Okay.
Coconut oil significantly raises LDL cholesterol. We are talking an increase of over 10 milli-GDL on average.
That is significant. But I have to play devil's advocate here because the keto and paleo crowds always have a counter-argument.
I know the one.
They say, sure, it raises LDL, but it also raises HDL, the good cholesterol, so it all cancels out.
That is the standard defense.
Yeah.
And it is true, coconut oil does raise HDL. But here is the nuance that cardiologists focus on. And this is where we need to stick to the well-established science. Raising HDL via diet or drugs has not actually been proven to prevent heart attacks.
Really? I thought high HDL was the goal.
It is a good marker of health, but artificially raising it doesn't seem to confer protection. We had drugs that raised HDL through the roof, but they failed to stop heart disease in trials. However, we have rock-solid proof that lowering LDL prevents heart attacks. So trading a proven risk factor, higher LDL, for a theoretical benefit, higher HDL, is just a bad gamble.
That makes perfect sense. It's like, sure, you installed a better alarm system, the HDL, but you also unlocked the front door for the burglars, the LDL.
That is a great analogy.
Now, does purified MCT oil do the same thing? If I take the brain fuel, am I wrecking my heart?
And this is the surprise. Pure MCT oil C8 and C10 does not seem to raise LDL cholesterol the way coconut oil does. It has a neutral or sometimes even slightly favorable profile.
Really? Why the difference?
It goes back to the express lane. Because MCTs are burned for energy so quickly by the liver, they just aren't hanging around in the bloodstream, being packaged into cholesterol particles the way the C12 in coconut oil does.
So, once again, they are not the same thing. If you are worried about your heart, coconut oil is a risk, but MCT oil might be safe.
Correct. If you have high cholesterol, treat coconut oil like a treat like butter or ice cream. It is delicious, but don't delude yourself into thinking it is heart medicine.
Clear enough. Let's move to the thing that probably drives the most sales: weight loss. The internet promises me that if I put MCT oil in my coffee, the pounds will just melt away. True or false?
True-ish, but with a massive asterisk.
I do not like asterisks.
I know. The meta-analyses, specifically Mummy and Stonehouse, show that MCTs do produce statistically significant weight loss compared to long-chain fats.
Okay, so it works.
It works to the tune of about half a kilogram to maybe 1.5 kilograms over several weeks.
Of a pound or two.
A pound or two.
Huh?
It is not nothing. The mechanism is real. It increases thermogenesis, meaning you generate a bit more body heat and you oxidize fat slightly faster. But it is not a miracle. And here is the replacement rule that everyone forgets.
Replacement rule.
This only works if you swap calories. If you're eating 2,000 calories of food and you add 300 calories of MCT oil on top of it, you will gain weight.
Of course.
It is just physics. You have to replace the olive oil or the butter you were already eating with the MCT oil. You can't just add it to a bad diet.
Right. You cannot just pour oil on a pizza and expect to lose weight.
Sadly, no. The other factor is satiety. C8 and C10 MCTs can stimulate hormones like PYY that make you feel full. Coconut oil does not do this nearly as well, so pure MCT might help you eat less later in the day.
Okay, so for weight loss, modest benefit, use pure MCT, and swap, don't add.
Perfectly summarized.
Now, I want to talk about something that surprised me in the research. We usually talk about weight loss or brain power, but there was a section in your notes on frailty and elderly people. This seems like a totally different demographic.
This is actually one of the most exciting emerging areas.
Yeah.
We have data, like the Izaki study, looking at frail, elderly people. We are talking about people struggling with sarcopenia, muscle wasting.
Which is a huge issue for aging. It is often the beginning of the end for independence.
Huge. They found that giving these elderly individuals a relatively small dose of MCTs, just 6 grams a day, combined with moderate exercise, led to significant improvements in muscle function.
Wow.
Their grip strength increased, their walking speed got faster.
6 grams. That is like barely a teaspoon and a half.
A very small dose. And the theory is that as we age, our mitochondria, the little power plants in our muscle cells, they get tired. They get worse at processing glucose and regular fats. But ketones, ketones are like high-octane jet fuel. They bypass the aging machinery and get the muscles firing again.
So it is not about building huge muscles. It is about health span, just keeping people functional.
Exactly. It is about being able to open a jar or walk to the store or get out of a chair. And the fact that this worked with such a low dose is really promising because elderly people often have sensitive stomachs.
Speaking of sensitive stomachs, we have to address the elephant in the room. Or maybe the rumble in the room.
Yes. The infamous disaster pants.
The technical term, I believe. I have heard horror stories of people trying MCT oil for the first time, maybe putting a huge dollop in their coffee and regretting it immediately.
It is very, very common. Because MCTs are absorbed so fast, if you take too much, your gut essentially panics. It draws water into the intestines, and you get rapid onset diarrhea and cramping.
So what is the protocol? How do we avoid disaster pants?
The mantra is start low, go slow. Do not start with a tablespoon. Start with 1 teaspoon, maybe even half a teaspoon, and take it with food. Do not take it on an empty stomach your first time.
And build up over time.
Yes. Over a couple of weeks, you can work your way up to that therapeutic dose of 15 to 30 grams if you are doing it for cognitive reasons. For the muscle benefit, you might only need that 6 grams, which is much safer for the gut.
And what about cooking? Can I fry an egg in this fancy C8 brain oil?
Generally, no. Purified MCT oil has a really low smoke point. It'll just smoke and taste bad. Coconut oil is better for cooking because it has a higher smoke point.
Got it.
But remember, if you cook with virgin coconut oil, you get some polyphenols, antioxidants, which are good. If you use the refined stuff, you lose those benefits too.
But regardless, don't use the expensive C8 oil for your stir fry.
A waste of money and a very smoky kitchen. Keep the MCT oil for your coffee, your smoothies, or salad dressings.
Okay, let's zoom out. We have covered a lot: the chemistry, the brain, the heart, the gut. If we have to distill this down for the listener who is standing in the supplement aisle right now, what is the verdict?
The verdict is that details matter. You cannot buy a generic label and expect a specific result.
Okay, give me the bullet points.
First, coconut oil is delicious, but it is not a metabolic miracle. It acts largely like a long-chain fat. It raises your LDL cholesterol, so if you have heart concerns, limit it. And it doesn't provide enough ketones to fuel the brain significantly.
And MCT oil.
MCT oil, specifically C8 and C10 blends, is a specific metabolic tool. It bypasses digestion, it generates ketones. It has evidence for helping with mild cognitive impairment, especially if you aren't an ApoE4 carrier.
Right.
It can help with modest weight control without wrecking your cholesterol. And it might help keep your muscles working as you age.
But they are not interchangeable.
Not at all.
You know, what really strikes me about this deep dive is how labeling can be technically true but totally misleading.
How so?
Well, a company can legally put source of MCTs on a jar of coconut oil because C12 is chemically a medium chain. But biologically, for the consumer who wants energy and ketones, it's essentially a lie.
It is the chemistry of hype. And that leads to a provocative thought for the listener to take away.
Let's hear it.
If our bodies treat C12 lauric acid so differently from C8 and C10, if one goes to the lymph and one goes to the liver, why are we allowing them to be grouped together on nutrition labels? When you look at a label that says 14G MCTs, you have no idea if you are buying the rocket fuel, C8, or the slow lane, C12.
That is a great point. It puts the burden on us. You have to look deeper. You have to look at the ingredients. Does it say fractionated coconut oil? Does it list caprylic acid? Or does it just say cold-pressed coconut oil?
Exactly. Don't buy the marketing. By the molecule.
By the molecule. I like that. And hey, maybe check your genetics too while you're at it.
It wouldn't hurt.
Thank you so much for breaking this down. I will never look at a jar of coconut oil the same way again.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, check your labels. Start with a teaspoon. Seriously, trust us on that. And we will see you on the next deep dive.
Stay curious.